Hello guys, and welcome back to Mental Health Mondays. I hope you are all well. In today's video I wanted to chat about coming to terms with a mental health diagnosis. This is a question I have a lot in my DMs, mainly in regards to a BPD diagnosis, which is what I've been diagnosed with. I've done a whole video on kind of how I got my diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, which I'll link on the screen now if you're interested in that. Sometimes it can take a long time to get a diagnosis and we can really want one, and then when you actually do get one it can be quite scary. So I just wanted to give you guys some tips on how to cope with it. These tips are going to apply to any mental health diagnosis, but obviously I've been diagnosed with BPD, so I'm going to talk about that quite a bit. Mental health diagnoses, I don't know what the word is, are such an interesting topic, and I feel like there's so much that I could say around them. It's this whole question as to whether a diagnosis is needed to kind of validate someone's mental illness, and I'm not here to say that you are not struggling with a mental illness if you don't have a proper diagnosis. However, the thing is, to recover from any serious mental illness, you do really need a diagnosis. I'm going to put it out there and saying that going to a doctor for the first time and for them to tell you that they think you're depressed is not a formal diagnosis. And I'm only saying this for people's benefit because, you know, I don't want people to be self-diagnosing, although it's important to kind of have in your head, you know, what you think it could be. Self-diagnosing and also just taking what one doctor has told you the first time you saw them is not a diagnosis. I wasn't actually diagnosed with borderline personality disorder until I was 21. Before that, I had just been told that I had just normal anxiety and depression. Now, I always felt like it was something more because I had friends who just had anxiety and depression, and I was just like, you know, they don't struggle with the same issues around relationships that I do. Like, I just had a massive thing around guys especially, and friendships, and reckless acts, and, you know, flipping between all or nothing. I had been in multiple different mental health services by then. However, I hadn't actually seen kind of more than, I would say, 3 or 4 times, like, one psychiatrist. So I do think when it comes to getting a diagnosis, actually seeing a psychiatrist regularly so they can get to know you is so important. But this video is, you know, what to do when you do get that diagnosis, because it's totally normal to not agree with the diagnosis. It's totally normal to be relieved but a little bit scared, to wonder what on earth happened in your life for you to deserve getting diagnosed with this mental illness. So when I was first diagnosed with BPD, my first reaction was kind of like, well, what's wrong with my personality? Because borderline personality disorder kind of, it's a bit offensive, and obviously now they've changed the name to EUPD, emotionally unstable personality disorder. I don't know how much nicer that is. I was kind of like, what is this? I've never heard of this illness, but also I'm very relieved because, like I mentioned before, I kind of always knew that there was something more to what was going on with me, and it took me going to a private psychiatrist and seeing him for I don't know how many sessions. He diagnosed me properly after maybe like 8. And then it's a kind of a case of, okay, so now I've got this diagnosis, and I was told to not Google it because just the stuff on the internet out there about people with borderline personality disorder is just actually horrendous. And I think it's weird how there are some mental illnesses that are so much more accepted by society than others. So depression and anxiety, we're so used to it, but when someone tells you that they've got borderline personality disorder, I guess because not everyone has heard of it, or then we have things that are really demonized like schizophrenia, or things like bipolar, which people tend to use as an adjective to describe the weather, or think that they know everything about bipolar because they know that it means that people have mood swings. It's difficult to know who to tell, but the thing is, as soon as you've got this diagnosis, obviously you've got to come to terms with it yourself. There's not really any benefit in fighting the diagnosis because all it's going to do is hold up your treatment. You don't have to tell every single person that you've met that you've just been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. You get to choose how many people you tell, who you tell, how you tell them. I mean, in my experience, I didn't make a big deal out of it. With my parents, like, they already knew I was unwell. I just kind of came home one day and said, oh, like, you know, I've actually got like this proper diagnosis. And they were just kind of like, oh, okay, like, you know, whatever. I mean, I don't even know if my mum and dad went on to Google it. What I always say, the best thing with mental illness is to drop it in as casually into conversation as you would anything else. I mean, obviously it is a massive thing in your life, but we really, really don't want other people around us to react. And especially with borderline personality disorder, you don't want your parents to then go and Google it and think, oh my God, like, wow, okay, this is a lot for me to deal with. When it comes to borderline personality disorder or another more stigmatized illness, I would definitely kind of try and give them your own description of it and say, look, this is what it is, this is, you know, how it's related to my life. Like, now I can explain why I did this on that night, blah, 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 blah. My tips on how to come to terms with your mental health diagnosis. Number one, stay off of Google. Obviously the internet has a lot of useful information, and a lot of you guys probably found my videos from Googling about self-harm or borderline personality disorder, depression, mental health, whatever it is. So obviously in that sense it's good. However, just please try and avoid going down the rabbit hole of reading negative articles about the illness that you've just been diagnosed with. If you really, really want to do research on what you've just been diagnosed with, if you want to find free help online, what I would recommend is going to a charities website. So you can go to a charity like The Mix, who I discovered recently, who are amazing, who have so many services available. Obviously then you've got things like Mind and Sane and Childline. I'll leave a link for all of these in the description below, but they're going to have more of a positive outlook on things, whereas I just really don't want you guys stumbling across forums where people talk negatively about your mental illness, because you really, really don't need that. So yeah, stay off Google. Number two, this is a really important one. Remember that this diagnosis and this mental illness does not define you. It's literally like a small part of you. And yes, it may feel overwhelming at times, and yes, like, it completely takes over your life, but I guess I would compare it to, I don't know, your hair color. I mean mine changes all the time, your dress sense, or anything about you, because the important thing is, I don't want to compare it to something like your height or your eye color that you can't actually change. Like, you can change and get better from this illness. It's literally just like small little thing in your brain, very, very annoying thing. So many people in the world are going to suffer with the same mental illness as you, which is very, very comforting, but also it's important to know and not compare yourself to other people, because everyone is on their own journey, and obviously an illness presents itself in different ways in each person. Like, obviously you're going to have very, very similar experiences to people, but everybody is different. And as overwhelming and horrible as this illness is, you can beat it, and you are so much stronger than it. And it's just, yeah, it's just so important to not let this like BPD or depression or anxiety define you, because you are not depression, you are not anxiety, you are not an eating disorder, you are whoever you are. And tip number three is to see it as a positive thing. You've got your diagnosis, and this means that you're now able to start specialist treatment for whatever your diagnosis is. The thing is with many different mental illnesses is they have a specific type of therapy that goes with them. So when I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, I was able to do DBT, which is a form of therapy that was created for those with borderline personality disorder. This is so much better because now your treatment is so much more focused on exactly what your illness is and how to recover from that illness. And you need to see you getting that diagnosis as like a starting point for, you know, a whole massive journey about learning about your illness and how to actually get better from it. And I just really want to stress that that's what the diagnosis is there for. It's not to give you this stigma that you're going to have to live with for the rest of your life. It is only so that the professionals can treat you in the correct way, just like they would give you scans in a hospital to find out what bone has been broken so they know exactly what surgery to do. That is, you know, what this diagnosis is for. So I really hope this was comforting. I actually found online when I was searching for this a really good worksheet to help with like coming to terms with a diagnosis, so I'll link that for you. It's actually for a Canadian website, but the general exercise is really good. Do let me know if this video helped in any way. I'm sending love to all of you who are either going without a diagnosis, trying to get a diagnosis, or have just got a diagnosis and are trying to come to terms with it. It is a tricky road and it is a long road to recovery, but I promise you, you will get there. I will see you in my next video. Until then, goodbye.